Numerology is called one of the receptacles for the truth. It's an art or a science for understanding you, who you are, and it's a code. And the code is in your name and in your birthday, that every letter has a number and every number has a meaning. And that's the code. It's a cosmic code.
And where did it originate from?
That's a wonderful question because nobody really knows. In India, they believe that it originated in India. In Egypt, they think it originated in Egypt. American Indians use numerology. The Mayans use numerology. It just seems to have grown up. As challenging as that is to believe, it was a given. It was given to the world a very long time ago, thousands and thousands of years ago. Pythagoras is considered the father of numerology, but he lived 600 years before Christ. They were using numerology way before Pythagoras' time, so it's really hard to answer that question. It's not numbers as we use them, it's numbers as symbols. And actually, I think it is numbers as we use them, but as we use them, it's only part. So numbers as quantity doesn't give the idea that there's a hidden side to numbers. And the hidden side is that they're symbols that represent truths. And as if you were looking at a hieroglyph, and you'd look at this glyph and you'd go, what does this mean? That would be the same thing as if you were looking at a 1 or a 2 or a 3 and you had never seen it before, and it would be this mystical shape or interesting shape, and you'd say, I wonder what this means. So it is with numbers. They're symbols and they have meanings. There's many different systems in use all over the world. There's a Tibetan system, there's an Arabian system, there's a very well-known Kabbalah system, and the system that is called Pythagorean is actually the newest system. It was developed about the turn of the century by a woman whose name was Mrs. L. Dow Ballier, and she put together Pythagorean concept of the law of opposites. I mean, it's amazing to think about. There was a time when we didn't really realize that for everything there was an opposite. And Pythagoras was the one who compiled the list of opposites, that if there's an in, there's an out, if there's an up, there's a down. And that was a revolutionary thinking at that time, which gives you an amazing insight into how far we've come in terms of consciousness of things we know and we don't even realize we know them. However, Mrs. Ballier put together the law of opposites with the Christian, Judeo-Christian Bible, the days of creation, with her own understanding of spirituality, and came up with the system that's called Pythagorean. It's the most commonly used in the Western world, and it's the easiest to use. So it connects A with 1 and B with 2 and C with 3, and the interesting thing about it, and the thing that I really enjoyed when I figured it out, is that every place in the alphabet is actually telling you its own number, so that in numerology, whenever there's a compound number, you add it, and you add it down to a single digit, so that, for instance, that the Z is the 26th letter in the alphabet and it adds up to 8. And so that every letter really holds its own place, so that the letters and the numbers are exchangeable in that way. The 1 is the 1, so the 1 goes out ahead, and it represents someone who's a leader, independent, trailblazer, pioneer. 2 is representing of someone who, or the characteristic of cooperation, sharing. The 1, it's 1 to 9, and then there are master numbers also, but the 1 to 9 lay out an evolution of mankind's consciousness, so it starts with the 1 as the beginning. And as if that was a soul's journey through consciousness, the 1 says, well, I'm here to find out who am I. and be strong and courageous in that search. And then as I know that, live in it. And then 2 says, okay, I have a sense of who I am. Now I'm here to work with you. So 2 is about harmony, cooperation, learning to work together. 3 in the evolving soul says, I know who I am. I know how to work with others. I'm here to see what it means to be a creative being. So 3 is about fun, joy, creativity, self-expression. 4 in the evolution says, okay, now my challenge is to learn to give some form to things. 4 is about form and structure. Our earth is four-sided, so it has some form in that north, south, east, and west. 4s are the ones that write rules and directions and instructions and figured out clocks and calendars and appointment books and days of the week. And so 4 gives form to things. 5 is here to expand and to say, yes, I've learned who I am, how to work with you, and to bring forth my creativity, bring some organization and structure to the world. And now I'm here to expand and look around and see what is this place about. So 5 is about curiosity, expansion, travel, progression. 5 is the expander, and it's right in the middle. The hand is 5 fingers, so 5 is like right in the middle of 1 to 9. 5 always comes in and expands things and brings in the new way of doing things. 6 represents love, service, responsibility, and is the first number in the line of numbers in the developing consciousness that says, well, gee, now I'm here to understand others and be of service, and it talks about love and responsibility and relationships. 7 then is the number that wants to look deeper. It's a very special number in the Bible. It's a special number. It has all kinds of special characteristics. And so 7 is about deepening, 7 is about wisdom, 7 is about doubting. The 7 represents someone who's looking for answers that are deeper and more meaningful than any other number at that point. It's the first one that really questioned, and so it's about trust and faith and wisdom. 8 is here to handle the money and business affairs of life, to give some structure on a higher level, where 4 does it in the family and the community. 8's a higher level of 4, and it gives structure in the world, so it's lawmakers and lawbreakers, because numbers have a negative and a positive side like everything else does. And so although I speak about the positive sides of the numbers, they all have their negative sides also. And 9 is represents humanitarian, someone who's here to understand beauty, compassion, to learn to be forgiving. People who have 9s are philanthropists and humanitarians, people who've gotten into wisdom teachings and philosophy, because 9 is an old number. It's gone through a lot, it's seen a lot. It represents someone who's looking for answers that are going to bring peace and of a real expansive nature. They're a little more difficult to talk about, and that's because they encompass lots more things. So yes, probably every number is a master number, yet there's some numbers that are given that title, and they're 11, 22, 33, 44, and probably someday 55, 66, 77, 88, 99. And the reason they're more difficult to talk about is because they're more challenging to live with. So a master number, since the way numerology works is anytime you have a compound number, you add it and you end up with a single digit. If you were to add an 11, it turns into a 2, and 22 turns into 4, and 33 turns into 6, etc. So you look at a master number, first of all, as the digits that it is. So an 11 is 2 1s, and that means it has the characteristics of being a strong individual. And then it reduces down to a 2, so now you have 1 who's the leader, who's here to be independent and be a trailblazer, working hand in hand with the 2, which is here to be a team person and be working with cooperation and sensitivity. And those 2 numbers are very far apart one from the other. One is here to be a leader, 2 is here to be a follower. And 11 is the spiritual teacher, or it's like a doorway that walks into a higher consciousness. So anybody that has an 11, wherever numbers show up in someone's chart, that's the closest thing in numerology to a schizophrenic pattern, because they're not sure if they're here to be a leader or a follower, or to be a trailblazer, or to stand in the strength of their own individuality. And I feel like master numbers have more choices to make, more responsibility, and more confusion about who they are and what they're doing. And that number is a great example of it, because people that have it are not sure who they are. It takes a long time before the master numbers evolve into being themselves. And until that time, the little number that they reduce down to is like the seed that the big master number grows up out of. So you would start out with a 2, which is hard to talk about in words because it's about feelings things, sensing things, knowing, intuitings, vibrations. That's the area, the realm of the 2. And so 11-2 is here to be a spiritual teacher, but as with any teacher, a teacher never knows what their student's learning from them. So the challenge of working with a number like the 11 is that that person just be brave enough to be whoever they are, and know that somehow that's going to assist others on their path. If I can be brave enough to be me, then I'm an example to others who are looking for an example of someone who's being brave and courageous. And then there's 2 of us, and that's the 11-2. I mean, it's like being strong to be itself, being sensitive at the same time, and being willing to be centered and in balance enough to just be courageous in its life. The 22-4 has a totally different set of circumstances that it's working with. Its personality is really different. 22 is 2 2s, and 2 is the number I was just speaking of that has to do with feeling things. So someone with 22s is someone who's trying to feel their self away through life, and yet because the 22 adds to a 4, and 4 is the one that gives structure and form to things, there's a lot of structure underneath that number. The little seed that the 22 grows up out of has to do with form and structure, and 4 is symbolized by a square, so it's like putting your life in a square, and then 22 grows up out of this square. 4 is learning to lay down good foundations, and 22 grows up out of it and wants to bring the world together and work in harmony. 33-6 is a totally different entity. 33 grows up out of the seed of the 6, and the 6 has to do with love, family, home, service, responsibility. Yet when it grows into a 33, 3 is the number of creativity, self-expression, joy. And I think the service of the 33-6 is to understand that its service is here to be creative and fun-loving and joyful and lift things to a higher level of creativity. That of all the numbers, I think 3 has the hardest time being itself, because nobody's given permission to grow up and be a fun-loving, joyful being living in their creativity. We're given permission to be hardworking. 4 gets a lot of confirmation to be itself. Oh, be hardworking, be dependable, down to earth, practical, lay down foundations. But 3 doesn't get a lot of encouragement to be fun-loving, joyful, and spontaneous. We're told to grow up and be serious and act our age, and money doesn't grow on trees, and learn to be the everydayness of a hardworking, responsible person. So 33-6 has a lot of confusion about, is it here to be of service? And that generally means to a lot of people, take everybody's problems on your shoulders and solve them. And people with 6s tend to be martyrs, tend to be the people who are in serving professions, tend to be the ones who burn out because they give themselves away and do not replenish themselves, because 6 looks around at everybody else and says what's wrong with them, and forgets that there's one inside who needs to be taken care of in order to do the work. So lifting up to 33 is a real challenge. We're only now starting to develop workshops and philosophies that bring in play and laughter and the importance of healing through laughter. And as we go along with that, 33 will become stronger and stronger, because that's the gift of the 33. It's got a tremendous amount of joy and creativity, and if it's not feeling like it has to be a 6, which is be responsible, it can allow that creativity to blossom and flourish. 44 is a number we're not even hardly beginning to tap into yet. And yet, when we do, it will be a number that signifies that we're really here starting to rebuild the world, because 44 and 8, the 4s and the 8s are similar numbers. They're the ones that are giving form and structure to things. So that's like recreating the structure, recreating the laws, looking at them in a whole other way, looking at God. 8 has to do with balance between the material and the spiritual, and bringing God into the center of all things. So by the time we start working, when the consciousness raises to when we're accepting and working with a 44-8, we'll be ready to rebuild the whole world, and it'll be a time where God is in the center of everything, and that part of the structure is a belief in a higher force, whatever you want to call that name. I use God simply because in English that word adds up to an 8. G-O-D, the letters that are assigned to it, when you add it up, it becomes an 8. So in that sense, 8 wants to balance the material and the spiritual, bring balance to all things, and ultimately bring heaven to earth. When I was writing my book, as I was writing the master numbers, the title of my book is Numerology, the Power in Numbers, a Right and Left Brain Approach. It was through the master numbers that I started to understand that, because I looked at the master numbers and I realized that 22, 11 turns into a 2, 22 turns into a 4, 33 a 6, 44 and 8, those are the even numbers. So once we get to 55, which will be a 10, then we'll start to move into the uneven numbers. That will be allowing us to go into our right brain, which the uneven numbers signify. And up until that point, the emphasis has been on the left brain. And clearly we look around the world and we can see that. The left brain is the one that we think has been dominating for a really long time. Yet the time is going to come when we're really going to balance it out, and everybody will be using both sides of their brain, and all you have to do is look at the master numbers to see the progression of how that's going to go. It is associated with Jesus. Jesus lived to be 33, and I know metaphysically I've read a lot of other people's opinions about that. I don't really have an opinion about it, except that in my mind 33 also, and one of the meanings that 33 is given is avatar, so that's where that would come in. Yet I think really Jesus, part of Jesus's whole ministry, which is the 6, would have to do with living in the concept of creativity, and certainly the idea of dying and being reborn again is an awful lot of creativity. So 3 also is lifting into a higher level. To me, 33 is lifting into the light and using light and bringing forward more light. And 3 is like spirit resides in joy. And so 3 is this effervescing, joy-filled energy. So I don't know how joyous the life of Jesus was, but I think on some level it was very joyous. Certainly, if nothing else, that he knew that he was doing his Father's work and doing it so well. I'm Jewish, so I didn't have a big upbringing that had to do with Jesus being an active part. I have learned a lot about him and the Christ consciousness as my choices have widened. And yes, 33 has a lot to do with Christ, but I think when we're using that number more, we'll be closer to the Christ consciousness and closer to an understanding of what that means than we are right now. Well, if an individual says, I'm just a 5 or just a 1, you know they don't know much about numerology. How in the world, we're such complex beings, how in the world could we ever simplify ourselves and turn ourselves into one number? And nor in astrology are you just your sun sign. There's so much more that makes up the fullness of who we are. And the truth of it is, most people have most numbers. Numbers, the even numbers are all one family, and the unevens are another family. So if you have a smattering of both, then you're going to have a real balanced person. If you have a heavier emphasis in one or the other, it would be a heavier emphasis in the creative side, the right brain, or a heavier emphasis in the left brain, the side that has form and structure to it. But most people do. I mean, there's so many places that you get numbers when you lay out a chart. Numbers are in your birthday, they're in your name, there's cycles that are going on daily, weekly, monthly, yearly. There's bigger chunks of time that things get broken down into. There's an opportunity for most of us to experience most of the numbers at one time or another in our life. And we change all the time. No matter how people don't want to acknowledge that that's so, or you run into someone you haven't seen forever and you say, oh, you haven't changed a bit in 25 years, and that's supposed to be a great compliment. When you think 25 years of experience, this person has definitely changed on some levels. And so if you work out their numerology, because there are so many different cycles, probably they are going through one or another in the numbers at some point in their life. And if you're dealing with a 9, then 9 is everything. So you've got all the numbers in there, and yes, we're way more than a number. First, you have to know a person's full name at birth. And so you know a person's full name at birth, and you take and work it out. So every letter in the alphabet has a number. A is a 1. If you were to take a piece of paper and write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 underneath it, you could lay out any alphabet in the world. Even in India, where I encountered an alphabet that had 126 letters, which would have been a challenge to work with, so I didn't even try. But if you have an alphabet, you can turn it into numerology. And although I live in the United States and our first language is English, and so I speak English, but if someone was here who first language was Spanish or Italian or Greek or whatever, that would be the language you would want, the alphabet you would want to use. So you lay it out, and you give every letter its number, and then you start and separate the vowels from the consonants, and then add. So you would add all the vowels from each name individually, all the consonants, then add the total of each name. And however many names you have on your birth certificate, that's how many names you would use. Now, a totally different piece of information comes from the birthday. Birthdays are all the cycles that you're going through all the time. So birthdays, from my perspective, birthdays are what you're here learning, and names are here explaining what you're doing. Names are explaining what you're here doing. Names also talk about what you've done in other lifetimes, talents and abilities that you bring in with you as a result of other lifetimes, if you believe in that. If you don't believe in reincarnation, then you can just say, oh, those are my talents, that's my gifts, that's the way I am. I've always been like that. But I take it back another step, and I believe that there are things that we've earned, whether we remember that we had other lifetimes or not. We have memories in our cells and habits and ways of being that were developed in other lifetimes. Names also get broken down into what's called the planes of expression, which are mental, physical, emotional, and intuitive, and explain how we operate on each one of those levels. And names also lay out the whole blueprint of our life, and that's what the bottom of this page is. It's called a table of events, and a name plots out year by year by year your life experiences. Now, the question people always ask at that point is, how could that be? And my name is something my father named me after his second aunt, and names are just arbitrary things. How can that be? And my feeling is names are not arbitrary things. I really think that when the soul is ready to incarnate, it sits up in heaven or wherever we are at that point with our board of directors. And since life on planet Earth, since Earth is school, we sit somewhere with our faculty, with our advisors, and they lay out the blueprint of our life and say, well, you could go to Earth and you would have these experiences, you would grow in this way, you would develop this wisdom, you would be challenged in this way. What do you think about it? And we go, great, I'll go for that. That sounds wonderful. And when we make that agreement, okay, great, I'll go for it, then we've established when we'll be born, our place, our ethnic background, the color we'll be, where our family will be living, and then the name goes in on as it's part of the package deal. So the name goes in, and there it is. So whether the parents get it, whether the father picks it up, the mother, whether it takes a nurse or somebody in the hospital to add a letter or say, no, that name is not spelled like that, it's spelled like this, that's what the soul wants in this lifetime. The next question is always, well, what about if I change my name? So I feel like, yes, of course you can change your name, but it was the name at birth that got you to the point where you could change your name. The name at birth goes in as the foundation. So if you were to build a house, you would never take your original foundation out. You could add rooms to it, put on a new roof, paint it, put on a new door. It would look different, it would feel different. Its function would be different, but you would never go back and take out the foundation. So that's the way it is with a name at birth. Even people that don't ever use their full name at birth, it's still there, and it's still part of their foundation. People that change their names lots of times like to think that they never were that person before, but since we're the sum total of all of our experiences, it's a little simplistic to say, oh, well, I never had those experiences, so I just blossomed full-blown into 32 years old, and here I am. So that's the full name at birth. And then the birthday, when the Bible says for everything there is a time and everything in a season, that's what the birthday explains, all the cycles, all the times. It starts out with everyone has one big, huge, gigantic, very long cycle. It's as long as they are living. It starts at birth and it ends at death. And that's what you find by adding up the day and month and year of birth and reducing that down to a single digit. And that's, from my perspective, that's your life lesson. So you have your whole life to deal with it. As long as you're alive, you're dealing with it on different levels. I think the goal is mastery, or definitely refinement, or some high level of where you will get to with that number if you live long enough, or not even if you live long enough, if you fulfill your amount of years that you've chosen when you chose this plan. Well, so I'll use my birthday. I'm born in January on the 12th day, 1936. So January is a 1 month. You would take that all the way up to October is a 1 month also. November is 11, which is the 2 month, and December is a 12, which is a 3 month. And my birthday is on the 12th, which turns into a 3, and then 1936 adds up to a 19. You add that one more step, it turns into a 10, and then you drop the 0, so 1936 becomes a 1. So my birthday numbers go 1, 3, 1, which adds up to a 5. My life lesson is 5. Remember, I was telling you 5 is the expander. 5 is about change, new ideas, progress. 5 loves to travel, new ideas. Here I am. What am I doing? I'm doing numerology. Certainly these are some very old ideas, yet they're still very new and far out for a lot of people. And that's 5. 5 loves to do new things. People with 5s, their friends are always saying, oh, you're always into something new. Why don't you just do the same thing? Well, 5 actually loves change, and it's the experience collector. So it's going around just saying, how many experiences can I cram into this lifetime? Oh, good. And then they don't just cram them in. There's a goal. So 5 also is the communicator. 5 wants to say things and uses its words to expand consciousness or lift consciousness or to bring about change. So my life lesson has to do with bringing change. Clearly, I feel like I'm doing a lot of my work through my book, and that's nice because it's talking for me in a lot of places that I wouldn't go or meet the people I do, but definitely 5 is bringing new ideas and helping shift the consciousness. People who have big 5s were Abraham Lincoln, Henry Ford, all the shapeshifters of the world have to do with 5s. So 5s bring change. So while I'm just talking about 5 being change, 5 could have tremendous fear of change. And a lot of the numbers have a lot of fear to be themselves. And I attribute that to our upbringing here of when I was a kid, it was really important to be just like everybody else. That was the big thing in the 50s, was to be everybody else. And yet 550s was the time that was bringing in change. So pretty soon here came the hippies who were thinking new thoughts and did a lot to bring in change. And yes, people block. And so are they dealing with their number from a positive side or a negative side or somewhere in between? Some days you can feel really courageous and out there, that's a 1. And some days be afraid to go out the door, that could be the same 1, but in a real negative space. And I think mass consciousness has a lot to do with that also, because what mass consciousness, from my perspective, has done a lot of is try to get us to be even numbers. So it's safe to be an even number. When we are little people, we're told to be even numbers. Even numbers are the ones that obey, that conform, that fit in, that all stand up at one time and sit down at one time and follow the rules and write your name up on this corner of the page and write it like this and don't do it like that. That way is wrong. So mass consciousness has been trying to teach us all to be even numbers, which would be like being in the left side of our brain. People who had uneven numbers, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, I don't think anybody can teach you how to be a freer soul, and that's what the uneven numbers are, and they're called odd. So that's something that you're not supposed to be. You're supposed to be even. And if somehow when we were all born here we were given permission to just flourish and be whoever we are and find out who we are, it would be totally different than it is where we're told to fit into a niche and conform and be part of your family and don't embarrass your mom and do what the teacher wants you to do. So people go along and it takes them a lot of years before they're willing to start expanding to find out who are they. And that's where a numerology reading or understanding or any delving into numerology gives you some permission, literally some freedom to be who you are, which is not who the neighbors want to brag about particularly, or who's going to get an award for going to school every day and never missing a single day at work. I mean, there's a lot of superficial things that have been laid on us by society because society wants us to be a glob that society can deal with. Numerology encourages people to be individuals and to understand how unique and special they are. The challenges and the pinnacles in the personal years are one of the reasons why numerology can go into so many different fields. It's very usable in business to know personal years, when things start, when things end, when's a year to be adventuresome, when's to take risks, when is a year to slow down and be real comfortable with laying down good foundations. It's also really helpful in understanding the cycles your employees are dealing with and your employers and the cycles that are in the stock market, cycles that are in any business. Anytime you have anytime you have a birthday, you would be able to plot out the cycles that entity, that business, that person was working with. Whether it's our country, whether it's your child, I mean, they're all the same. And I honestly don't know how people do goal planning without numerology, because it's so important in understanding the natural flow of any entity that has a birthday. And also people really know their own personal years without ever hearing of numerology, never hearing of it. They're still doing the right thing. They're getting married in the right year, they're getting divorced in the right year, they're ending things, starting things. Yet it's really nice to have confirmation that, yes, wow, I was right on. My intuition told me this and I acted. Otherwise, we look around for an excuse or a justification. Oh, it just happened out of nowhere. When actually it didn't just happen out of nowhere. So understanding the numbers is an excellent way of hiring people, putting them in the right jobs, giving them the right responsibilities that they'll flourish with, instead of the Peter principle of go into overload and that's where you belong. Or working with your children and understanding, yeah, this is a free-spirited soul and I can preach all I want and they're going to do it their way. Or if a child has an 8, which is controlling, which is letting down the laws, that child is so hard on themselves and has such high ideals and expectations, the parent doesn't need to do anything except say, hey kid, just lighten up a little bit and you're going to do fine. Actually, our country was, the founding fathers of the United States were Masons, were Freemasons. Freemasonry has a lot to do with numerology. When the founding, we commonly think of our founding fathers as being Americans, but each one of them, none of them were born here. There was no America to be born in. So they were all into much deeper spirituality and wisdom teachings than we have any idea of today. So that our country was really set up with numerology principles. And if we could just probably get back to them or understand what they are or expand them in a way, we probably would be able to work on a more even keel. If, I guess this is an inappropriate thing to say, but if more people get into deeper spirituality and greater wisdom teachings, everything would run on a more even keel. The problem is, even Freemasonry has bad name, just as numerology has a bad name. I honestly had someone one time be afraid to even come near me because she said I was doing the work of the devil. I just said to myself, gosh, if this is the work of the devil, it's really hard to believe because it feels so filled with light and so filled with permission to be who I am. How can that be wrong? People that I give readings to, it's like they sort of straighten up and they push the hair off their face and they line up more with who they are and the strength of their being, and they drop away a lot of who they should have been or were supposed to be or their expectations, and they center in and they go, yeah, this is who I am. I'm not who I tried to be all those years. I've had clients tell me how angry they were for days at all the people that they believed. Finally they centered in and said, well, this is who I am, and then you can drop the anger. And so numerology is a great tool for healing, which I did not understand for a long time, but to know that your own plan and purpose in life definitely brings a tremendous amount of healing. That's my hope for the future. My dream is to see numerology being a household word and have people use it much more frequently than they ever have in the past, and that each person will have a greater sense that they do have a plan and a purpose here, special, unique talents to carry it out. Yes, they may not be their brother or the kid down the street, but they definitely have what they need to go on with their life, and just encourage themselves to be more of an individual, braver and stronger and lined up with what they're here to do.